Good. We are streaming live to the London Vegans Facebook group, and we also will be hopefully putting this up on YouTube. So I'll just say welcome everybody. My name is Brian Jacobs from London Vegans. We are a vegan social group, obviously based in London. We have meetings the last Wednesday of each month, usually with a guest speaker. So just say a big welcome to those of you who are new to London Vegans. We have as our guest speaker this evening Dan Graham, and Dan is from Vegan Organic Network, and I'll read the title of his talk. It's a roadmap to solving the ecological crisis, and hopefully within that he'll tell you more about the work of Vegan Organic Network. So without further ado, may I hand over to Dan. Thank you, Dan, for joining us.
All right, thanks very much, Brian. Thanks for inviting me along. Yeah, I'm Dan from the Vegan Organic Network. We're an educational charity. We're all about creating a green, clean, cruelty-free planet, a world with clean rivers and oceans, abundance of wildlife, and healthy, nutritious food for all. And I think, well, who doesn't want to live in a planet with clean rivers and oceans and abundance of wildlife and healthy food for all? With this shared vision, humanity's shared vision, it makes me wonder sometime how we got into the mess that we're currently in. Recently, back in December of 2022, there was the COP15 Biodiversity Conference, which was opened up by Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN, and his opening speech, he said, we've got to stop this orgy of destruction. Humanity has become a weapon of mass extinction. A recent UN report has said 40% of the world's land is degraded, and if we carry on as we are, over 1 million species, many of them insects, will become extinct over the next 10 years. All the countries in the world took part in the biodiversity conference, except one, the biggest polluter of all, the United States. But all the countries taking part in the conference did come to an agreement, and they agreed that they would conserve at least 30% of their land and seas to nature, which is a good thing. But quite like the COP15 climate change conference, which was 6 weeks before the biodiversity conference, and why these two conferences were not just one big conference shows the problems with the approach of the world's governments at the moment. The thing that these two conferences had in common, if none of them addressed the devastating effects of animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of ocean dead zones, river dead zones, loss of wildlife, loss of tree cover, loss of biodiversity, degraded land. The list goes on. Wildlife currently is on its knees. There was a report by some scientists back in 2018, a peer-reviewed report which was published in the Guardian newspaper, which said that of all the mammals on the planet, mammals don't include birds, of all the birds on the planet by weight, of all the birds on the planet, 70% of all the birds are chickens. Of mammals by weight, only 4% of mammals, all the mammals on the planet are wild. 36% of all the mammals on the planet are human beings, and 60% by weight, all the mammals on the planet are farm animals, which makes farm animals by weight and probably by numbers the most successful mammals on the planet. Pigs, sheep and cows, maybe in terms of weight or numbers, but in terms of quality of life, probably the least successful creatures on the planet, many of them never getting to see the light of day and slaughtered prematurely. Some friends of mine go to the Manchester Pig Save, which is a place where they see pigs going off to being slaughtered, and I think they have a few minutes to sort of say their goodbyes and their hellos to the pigs. And these pigs are 6 months old. So the optimum age to bring these pigs to slaughter is at 6 months of age. They pump him full of steroids and antibiotics and whatever else they do to fatten them up. And I think at the Manchester Pig Save, they slaughter 60,000 pigs a week. So yeah, neither the COP15 or the climate change conference or the biodiversity conference addressed the devastating effects of animal agriculture. And what I think these conferences should be doing, all the countries that attend the conferences should be make a map of their land and sea and show all the areas of which are polluted, all the ocean and river dead zones, all the degraded soil areas. So there could be a map where we go, these are the areas that need cleaning up. And also on the map should be the industries which are polluting the environment. And when we say industries polluting the environment, we're not talking about some fly tippers that are going out in the middle of the night and we don't know who they are. We're talking about industries that are operating day in, day out. So we need to keep our eye on the ball. If people want to live in a world with clean rivers and oceans, then we've got to stop polluting them. It's not rocket science. So yeah, these conferences really need to up the game and start taking things seriously. So animal agriculture uses, I think in the world, it's 80% of all the world's agricultural land. There's not only the devastating effects of the animal agriculture, there's the devastating effects of the way we grow our food, which is conventional agriculture, which is a misleading word. Conventional gives the impression that it's something we've been doing for a long time, whereas conventional agriculture in terms of growing food is relatively new. It was only at the beginning of the 20th century when Fritz Haber, a German scientist, worked out how to fix nitrogen from the air to make ammonia, which could be used to make nitrogen-rich fertilizer. But the main use at the time was to make bombs for the First World War, and the Second World War, bombs to kill people. And a similar story is true of pesticides. It was also Fritz Haber, known as the father of chemical warfare, or Dr. Evil by some, invented the first pesticides, which were used on the battlefields of the First World War to kill people. He invented Zyklon B, which was used in the Second World War in the concentration camps, once again to kill people. So it was at the end of the Second World War where the bomb-making factories became redundant, and some bright spark said, well, we can use these bomb-making factories and this bomb-making material to make fertilizer, and we can call it the Green Revolution. The only way to feed a growing population is by feeding our plants with chemicals and pesticides. We're now reaping the rewards of this experiment. 70 years on, there's an epidemic of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, food-related diseases. What we eat is all about the nutrients in the soil are the nutrients in our food. And if there aren't any nutrients in the soil, the only nutrients are going to be from the chemicals or the pesticides which they're grown with. So this is the birth of so-called conventional agriculture. Maybe it might be more honest to call it as chemical and bomb-making material agriculture. Anyhow, it was only after the birth of conventional agriculture that the organic movement was born. It was in the 1950s. Some farmers came together and said, hang on a minute, we've been growing our fruits and vegetables and our food since the beginning of agriculture. We've been growing our food organically since the start of agriculture. Organic food production used to be 100% of the market, and now 70 years after its first, the organic movement was born, it's now only 3% of the market. So So the organic movement was born, and then sometime after the organic movement was born, the vegan organic movement was born. It was in the 1990s that some vegans and some vegan farmers came together and said, these organic farmers are saying we've got to have animal dung and fish blood and bone as fertilizer to grow our fruits and vegetables. And these farmers said, we've been growing our fruits and vegetables since the start of agriculture. The Aztecs and the Mayan civilizations never used any animal inputs to grow their crops. And throughout the world, people have been using companion planting methods and veganic methods. They haven't called it veganic, it's just the way that people have grown food throughout the ages. So thus, the vegan, organic, veganic, stock-free, there's a few different words. There's the biocyclic vegans used in Europe. And it's important to understand a few differences, subtle differences. Here in the UK, we have the Stockfree Organic Standards, which are certified by the Soil Association. And when buying organic food, I don't think people are quite aware of how organic their food is, because within the organic system, there's a derogation which says if an organic farmer can't source organic dung, he's allowed to buy his dung from or it's given to them, dung from a conventional farm which uses pesticides, chemicals, and the animals are fed with antibiotics and steroids and all the other rubbish. So when we go out and buy our organic food, we don't know how organic it is. And also another thing, when in the hen production, the male old chicks are killed, the day-old male chicks are killed at birth, and these are also used in organic food production. They're crushed at birth and they can be used as fertilizer. Some people say, well, I don't eat conventional, I don't eat organic food because although I don't like pesticides and chemicals, I don't want to have food that's grown with slaughterhouse byproducts. But the slaughterhouse byproducts, there's 80 billion farm animals are slaughtered every year, plus a load of trillions of fish. And the waste from these animals goes wherever they can put it. It goes on the conventional farms, it goes on the organic farms, it goes into the seas and the oceans. There's too much of it. So unfortunately, that isn't a way of getting around not having your food grown with dead animals. The only way to get away from that is buying your food from a stock-free organic farm. So the Vegan Organic Network created the first Stockfree Organic Standards. There was a book written by Jenny Hall and Ian Tolhurst back in 2002, and this was the foundation of the Stockfree Organic Standards. And recently, in January of this year, we had a whole revamp of the standards. We've had lots of extensive talks with the Soil Association, and we at the Oxford Real Farming Conference, we relaunched the Stockfree Organic Standards. The Soil Association now certify the standards. So for a farmer to be certified as stock-free organic, first of all, they have the organic certification. Then there's a further inspection to check that they meet the stock-free organic standards. Means they don't use any animal inputs or have any farm animals on their land. So for the extra stock-free certification, they have to pay an extra fee, £175. So the Vegan Organic Network is supporting farmers in this. So we're paying the extra £175 to encourage as many farmers as possible to take up the standards. The standards, farmers are only getting to know about the standards, so it'll be a few years before we have lots of farms that are certified as stock-free. But I think a lot of farmers are actually, by default, actually stock-free organic because a lot of them do use those methods. So hopefully we're going to have more and more farms around the country where we can buy our produce. So if you do decide to become a Vegan Organic Network member, your money does go towards supporting farmers as well as gardeners. So yes, we've got the Stockfree Organic Standards. You're going, well, yeah, we are creating a map, so we'll be launching a map very soon of the Stockfree Organic Farm. So hopefully you'll be able to find a Stockfree Organic Farm near you. If you're unable to find a Stockfree Organic Farm near you, the only way to get veganic or stock-free food is by growing it yourself, or the other way is from nature. Nature, all wild food is veganic by definition. There's no animal inputs are used. So you can go out, it's probably the most healthy and nutritious food, and it's free. So, and we also do an online show called, what's it called? A seasonal guide to foraging, which we do once every 2 months. So yeah, check out our YouTube page. You'll find lots of information about that. The vegan organic method of growing food is all about feeding the soil. Soil science has come a long way. We still probably know less about the soil than we do about outer space, but soil is the foundation of all life. Plants, soil and plants are the foundation of all life. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years before we were even a twinkle in somebody's eye. So there's some quite interesting soil restoration projects happening at the moment. There was a project in China on the Laos Plateau where they had a massive desert there, which is in fact the size of France, and working with soil association with soil scientists, the people managed to transfer this totally degraded desert to a thriving place full of wildlife, people growing crops. They've stopped animals grazing on the land, and now it's a thriving environment. So we do have the scientists, we do have the technology now to restore our landscapes, and there are restoration projects happening around the world. Not as many as there could be. I mean, these conferences, the biodiversity conference, the climate change, this is what they should be talking about. They should be talking about restoration projects. We can restore all our land. We can bring it all back to life. So it's all there for the taking. So we got the Stockfree Organic Standards, but on top of supporting farmers, we also support gardeners, and we have resources for gardeners on our website. There's a month-by-month growing guide, and we have a monthly show called Veganic Gardeners Question Time, which just so happens to be on tomorrow night. So tune in. And if you've got any questions, please send them in, because we always need questions for Veganic Gardeners Question Time. The other thing that we're doing for the Veganic Gardeners is that we're just launching a world map of veganic gardeners. So the world map will include things like restoration projects, colleges, schools, gardens, allotments, anybody that's using veganic methods to grow their crops, their food, their plants, their pot plants. In order to qualify to get on the map, onto the veganic gardening map, all you need is one pot plant. If you've got a pot plant and you're not using any chemicals or pesticides or any fish blood, bone or manure to grow it, then you qualify. Or if you have a garden which you've abandoned, you don't do anything in it, then that's veganic, because you're not doing anything in it. So do get on the map, do get your friends to get on the map. And the idea is we do create a network. We create a network where we're all connected by our roots. Yeah, we do have this internet, which is all wonderful, but the mycelium, roots, plants, trees network is a lot more sophisticated than anything that humans have come up with. We don't understand it. They're all communicating, they're all working symbiotically, supporting each other, communicating with each other, and they've got a whole healthy system. And maybe that's the way for us to tune in and to connect with each other. We can connect with each other as gardeners, we can share resources, seeds, plants, we can have gatherings, and you can look on the map and you can see if there's other veganic gardeners in your area, or when you're traveling around the world, you can see forest gardens or people that you might be interested to visit. So please, yeah, do get on and find out about our map. So the other thing I was going to talk about was housing. So I think anyone that lives in the UK, probably in other parts of the world as well, will know that housing is a massive, massive problem. The prices are just going through the roof. Rent and housing prices are going through the roof. You go, well, how's this linked to veganic agriculture? Well, as it happens, 85% of the agricultural land in the UK is used for livestock farming. I think it's 45% is for the animals to graze, so nothing can grow, and the other 40% is to grow animal feed. So on top of this 40% of the UK's agricultural land to grow the feed, we also import a load of feed. So our land footprint for our livestock is even bigger than that. So in terms of agricultural land, it's 85%. In terms of the total land mass of the UK, livestock uses 50% of the total land mass of the UK. Houses and gardens use 1%. And it doesn't take a genius to work out the problem. Why, when they say we've got to stop this urban sprawl, maybe it's not urban sprawl that's the problem, but it's the farming sprawl. Apparently there's 33 million sheep in the UK, and each sheep costs the UK taxpayer £13. So we're paying for these sheep to degrade our environment, make sure nothing can grow. It is ridiculous. We can rewild our land. It does need rewilding for the environment, to save the planet, to save humanity. But while we rewild the planet, we can rewild it for wildlife, for plants, for trees, and for the people. We can create off-grid eco-villages. We have incredible technology. We have all these independent eco-villages which are working in harmony with the environment, which are supporting the environment, not polluting the environment. Maybe not everyone would want to live in them, but I think I might like to live in one. So yeah, so that's what I see as solving our housing crisis. So yeah, I think that brings us just about to the end. So I think it's important when people are talking about the environment and all the problems that we are facing, that we do keep our eye on the ball. It isn't complicated what we want. We do just want a planet with clean rivers. They are our indicators. The state of our rivers and oceans and our big predators. We got big predators and clean rivers and clean oceans, then we'll be doing all right. So please join us. If you do join us, you'll get a copy of our latest magazine, Growing Green International, with George Monbiot on the front. Yeah, keep it green, keep it clean and cruelty-free. Yeah, any questions?
Thank you very much, Dan. Just if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand using the facility on Zoom, or you can post your question into the chat box. I think there is a hand raised, but I'm just to see who's is John. Yeah, hold on a second. I'm going to add you. Hi, John. Do you want to unmute yourself, please?
Yep, I'm on. Yep. Great. Firstly, I'm all in favour of vegan organic food, but I do know that when you talked about the times gone by when we didn't use lots of animal manure and fish bones, etc., in those days there were a lot more animals creating manure inadvertently, a lot more birds pooing all over the place, a lot more insects than there are today who either die and then rot. And if you take into account there's many fewer of those animals around now, do you think there is a case for a small amount of animal manure to be used to compensate for this lack of wild natural manure?
I think you have to look at the Stockfree Organic Farms, and they grow their fertilizer on site. And you look at farmers like Ian Tolhurst, who've been growing without any manure for over 30 years, and they have things like beetle banks, and they're totally dependent on the wildlife and having lots of biodiversity. So they encourage biodiversity, and it's quite interesting in his farms. If you do, it's worth a visit going to his farm. But what you'll see in his farm is that there's all these birds of prey which circle his farm all the time. But the interesting thing is that they don't go over the adjacent farms which use pesticides and chemicals on the farms. So in order to bring the wildlife back, and I think also as vegans, if we're saying we're dependent on animal agriculture in order to grow our food, then it puts us in a very difficult situation. But yeah, I think nature is the proof in itself. You revive nature, and the wildlife comes back. So when we say we don't use any animal inputs, we're actually, in actual fact, we're totally dependent on animal inputs. So but from wild animals, not from domestic cows and sheep and pigs.
Anything to add to that, John? You want to?
Well, I would say that if you're doing small scale vegan organic farming, it absolutely would work. But if you want to feed billions of people, it is so involved, vegan organic farming. I don't think there's enough committed farmers who'll be able to do it on such a large scale to feed such a increasingly population of humans.
Well, I did actually, you come to that point, I'm quite pleased you came to that point, because I did actually miss out a part of my talk, which was actually talking about veganic farms around the world. And actually here in the UK, we've got quite, compared to the rest of the world, we've actually got veganic farming on quite a small scale. So if you go over to Canada, you've got organisations like 1 Degree, and they have massive farms growing wheats and all sorts of vegetables, which all go out into the supermarkets. They're on a much bigger scale. And you go onto their website, they're called 1 Degree. And also in Europe, there's a organisation called Vegan Biocyclic, and they're operating on a massive scale, and they're supplying supermarkets, and they're all about building soil fertility. This is what it's all about. They're saying that, this is all working with soil science. They're all saying what we have to do is build up the soil fertility, and that's the best way to grow healthy plants, to create healthy food. So I don't really see, I think the proof is in the pudding. Another thing I did miss out on, I did want to mention, was Lawrence Candy. Back in 2018, we do a show called Farming for a Future. And it's where farmers come on and ask our panel questions about farming problems. And we had this beef and dairy farmer, 10-generation beef and dairy farmer, came onto the program. He said, "I'm tired of slaughtering my cows. How do I grow veganic?" Anyhow, just to cut a long story short, we went to visit him last summer. He has 350 acres, by the way, and he had his first crop of veganic oats and wheat, and now he's talking about making veganic oat milk. So I don't think, as vegans, it's important that we support farmers like Lawrence Candy, and also I think it's important that we say to our vegan producers that we want vegan organic food. So it's like Plamil. I've spoken to Plamil, and they have their organic soybeans grown in France, and they say at the moment it's bought from a cooperative, and they don't know which farms are vegan organic and which ones aren't. But if they said to their farms, we want this product, and if the consumers are saying to the vegan companies, we want vegan organic food, we want vegan food, that's what we're asking for. And if we can't, otherwise it makes veganism into a bit of a joke. If you've got veganism and we're totally dependent on our animal agriculture, but we're not, and the proof's in the pudding, like I said before.
Thanks for the question, John. By the way, one of the questions that we asked in the chat was tying with that, is it scalable, which I think you've just answered. I was just wondering, because within the growing of crops, there's two aspects. One is the soil, and the other is the sprays that the traditional mass-produced farmers would be using on the crops to stop birds and creatures from eating the crops. So you're dealing with the soil aspect, but what about the other aspects? So, because it's in nature, you would want, and that normally birds and creatures, insects would be eating these crops, wouldn't they, as food? So what's the way of dealing with that?
Well, just look at nature. Look at how successful nature is at growing plants. You know, you go out foraging and there's lots of, you know, we on our foraging show, we have someone, Jo Barker, and she's got the world record for the most foraged, the most ingredients in a salad. And then she had 300 ingredients.
Wow.
And she quite often walks out. I can't do it, but I know a few nettles and a few plants. But she goes out and she, you know, in half an hour, she'd go out and pick, you know, dozens and dozens of things. This is all grown in nature. So we're trying to get close to nature. So nature takes the plants and nature have a whole way of working together to grow healthy plants. So we are dependent on the birds, we are dependent on the wildlife to have healthy plants. As soon as you take those things away, which is what happens in conventional agriculture, you've got bare fields of monocrops, you haven't got any beetle bags, the birds have all gone away because of all the pesticides. So we don't have this balance. So nature does provide the balance. And once again, you know, the proof is in the farms that are doing it. I'm not a farmer myself, but I'm aware that the vegan farms are very successful. And I think there's a farmer in Canada, Jimmy Bedell, and he did some studies on organic farms and vegan organic farms and conventional farms, and he found that the food production on the vegan organic farms outdid the organic and the conventional farms. I don't know if that was because he was biased, but that's what his study showed.
Yeah.
So unless all these veganic farmers are all full themselves and making up these figures and showing pictures of all these abundant crops, I don't know, maybe it's all a big conspiracy. But from what I know and for the places I've visited, it all looks real and it all looks pretty healthy to me.
So with those who are doing, I mean, I think you're saying the stock-free farming and vegan organic is interchangeable. Is that right in terms of the terminology?
So in terms of language, stock-free is a terminology which farmers understand. So farmers would understand what stock-free means. So
yeah.
So stock-free is used for farms. So we have stock-free organic. That's the certified farms are called stock-free. But if you're a gardener, you'll be called veganic. You wouldn't be able to be called stock-free. Okay. So yeah, there's a terminology which is used for farmers.
Okay. Thanks for that. Zenith, are you okay if I spotlight you? Okay. Just add. And if you could unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
Well, thanks for a very interesting talk, Dan. Are you saying stock or stop? You're saying stop, aren't you?
Stock, as in STOCK.
Yeah.
Like livestock. So it's a livestock farming terminology. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that must be it. So when you talk about building up soil fertility, how's that done?
Well, it's sort of working with nature. I mean, basically, you know, plants draw out their energy from the sun, which is turned into carbon. So actually, I think 60% of the carbon which goes into the plants then exudate into the soil, feeding the microorganisms, feeding the mycorrhizal fungi, which in turn look after the roots of the plant and provides things for the plant. So I think what we're trying to do as growers is to create a healthy ecosystem for the soil to take care of itself. Once we create that, the soil, like it's evolved over millions and millions of years. It's only the reason we got problems with the soil is because of tilling and grazing and chemicals and pesticides. So when you take those things away and you start putting the right ingredients into the soil and you start having cover crops, so we talk about having green manure. So green manure can be quite a confusing term. So it's not actually putting manure onto the field, but it's actually growing a cover crop. So the field, like in nature, there's cover all the time. There's green cover, which is putting nutrients back into the soil and creating the healthy soil. That makes sense.
Does that answer the question?
What would a green cover crop be?
Like mustard or clover. Yeah, there's all sorts, depending on the soil and the land and where you are. Yeah, there's different things you can use.
So you use that for a few years before, and then
Well, you use it all the time. So whenever, so you have a crop. So there might be the cover crop might actually be growing at the same time as the plants are growing. But certainly you don't want the soil to be bare. You want it to be left, like you see in a lot of fields where the soil's just being left bare to the elements, and this is when the soil is most vulnerable. So we try to keep the soil covered with something growing on it all the time, and sometimes more than one thing, like the idea of companion planting is very common in veganic agriculture.
how does that work? If you want to have a crop of wheat, how can you make sure you get your crop at the end of it?
So I think with the wheat, like Lawrence Candy, he grows wheat, and I've never grown wheat myself, and like I said, I'm not a farmer. But he's had a very successful crop, and while we were visiting his farm, he just harvested his wheat and oats, and he had a bumper crop. But what he'd done immediately after he'd done his harvest, he'd planted all the green manure, so he had all clover growing round his farm. So then the soil was covered. So until he was ready for his next crop to go in, the soil would be covered with the green crop, which would be keeping the soil healthy until the next time they were going to do some planting.
Thanks for that one. Let's go back to John. We had a spotlight again.
Yeah. Can you explain why organic food is always more expensive than the modern production of food? They're not having to pay for fertilizers or pesticides. It's always more expensive when you go into a shop. There's Planet Organic or any others. I'd like to know why you believe this is the case.
Okay, good question. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I think with small scale food production, it's the labor costs which are the main sort of driving force. And also, if you look at the UK in terms of costs of food generally, compared to Europe, our food costs are very low. But the difference with our food costs are very low compared to Europe, but in Europe, the housing costs are very low compared to here. So we might have cheaper food, and like you say, the organic food is more expensive, but the farmers are being squeezed. So they've got their real costs. They've got to buy their seeds, they've got to pay for their labor, and the organic growing is maybe more intensive than the conventional farms, where you've got people just going out with sprays and pumping the crops with chemicals. But at the end of the day, when we buy food, we're buying something for our bodies, so we can choose to go out and buy junk food, or we can go out and buy food which is going to be nutritious for our bodies. So obviously, if you're buying something grown with chemicals, it's not going to be as nutritious as food grown in healthy soil. So personally, I do think it's a price worth paying. There is always forage food. You always get a foraging book, but I think it's the costs, and I think the farm, and also the other thing, if you look at a lot of industries like the meat and dairy industry, they're actually subsidised industries. And what we really do need to encourage the environment and a healthy food system is for people that are growing healthy food and having a farming system which is good for the environment. The government should be subsidising these farms. I mean, what happens is that farmers are given a choice between having some livestock on the land, which they'll get paid subsidies for, whereas they might want to grow fruit trees, but they won't get any subsidies for it. So I think we need to, look at our priorities, and I think the bill from the National Health, a lot of it comes down to the food that we eat. And a fraction of that national health budget went into supporting healthy food growing, then we'd have a healthier population and the food wouldn't be so expensive.
Great question, great answer. My screen's gone a bit funny. I'll try and check it on it in a moment's time. What I was going to ask you is that as the Vegan Organic Network grows, and you mentioned about the map that you've created, or that's been created, will you be working then alongside the what we call organic food delivery companies like Riverford and Oddbox, Able and Cole, that sort of company, so that these foods become more accessible to people like myself?
Well, certainly, well, in fact, in our latest magazine, our latest magazine, there's actually an interview with Guy, what's his name? Anyhow, the head of Riverford Organics. He actually was interviewed, and he supports the work that we're doing. So hopefully in the future, hopefully the near future, we are going to be working with him. Yeah, there'll be veganic food on your doorstep with the Stockfree Organic label on.
That'd be fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. A couple of comments. If anybody has any questions, you can either post them in the chat box or you can raise your hand. A couple of, or 2 or 3 questions or comments that have come up. Claire mentions, I've seen farms where wheat was underplanted with white clover. I think it ties in what you were saying earlier. Francis, I've got a question about the earlier question. It says soil health is not only dependent on carbon, nitrogen fertilizers are popular and work because they are needed for growth. Same with other micronutrients. How can you feed those nutrients back? Well,
I think the thing is, you only have to look at nature and go, it works. Nature works. So all this thing of the thing is, when we add nitrogen with chemical fertilizers, the plants can only use a fraction of this nitrogen. So what happens with the rest of it? It gets washed away, gets washed into the rivers. It pollutes the environment, and also the plants. It's like a sugar fix. The plants become dependent on these substances and need more and more. And eventually, like any drugs, they stop working. So, nature does work, and we've got plenty of nitrogen fixing plants which can keep our soil healthy.
And the next one is, does the Vegan Organic Network engage to promote veganism with the public?
Well, I think, yeah, well, that's what we're all about. This is veganism. We're talking about having, vegans. We got this mass grow of vegans, but how many vegans have eaten vegan food? And vegan food means it's grown without dead animals. I mean, we got to get real, and it is all part of the problem. We can grow our food without dead animals, and as vegans, we don't want to be dependent on it. So yeah, for sure, that's what we're promoting. We're promoting veganism.
I think some vegans may have opted against eating organic food for the reasons you gave earlier, because organic involves or can involve animal manure, animal byproducts, whereas they may be thinking, let's go for non-organic because it may not involve any of those, but it's just chemical fertilizers. And so you've got this maybe a dilemma at the moment, whereas when hopefully vegan organic takes off, then they've got no excuse and they'll be eating healthier food. And it'd be better for the environment as well.
So sorry, I'm not sure if I include that in my talk, but to be clear, 80 billion land animals are slaughtered, plus loads of fish, and the manure, the blood, the bone goes wherever they can put it. It's polluting our rivers, it's polluting our oceans. It goes onto the conventional farms and it goes onto the organic farms. Yeah. So eating organic or conventional doesn't make any difference in terms of animals.
Right. Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. I know John's got another question. Let me again, that's the spotlight and turn it off.
In the Middle Ages, about 90% of the population were engaged in farming. Now it's about 1% of the population are engaged in farming. And I would say that people would go for the easier option when there's so few farmers, large scale, and they just go for the easy one, which is manure and pesticides. What do you think the future has got in hold for farming? Do you think it actually will go more organic, or will it just stay on what they think the short-term easy route is, using industrialized type of farming?
Well, we got to see we're a short route to what, we're in the midst of an environmental crisis. And if we want to have a shortcut to speeding up the environmental crisis, then yeah, carry on as we are, grow conventional, do everything that's convenient, get in your car, get on a plane, get your chemical sprays out, spray those bugs away. Yeah, that's the short way of getting things done easily, but it's also the short way of terminating our existence on the planet. So I think we got, like I say, is keeping your eye on the ball. What do we want at the end of the day? What world do we want to live in? And if we want to live in a world, a world with clean rivers, then we've got to clean them up. We can't have these industries which are the manure and the chemical industries which are polluting them. So it's what we want, really. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, John. Let me remove. I've got another question for you, Dan. Does foraging harm wild habitats as it takes scarce food away from wildlife? If every person on the planet foraged, there soon wouldn't be any wild. Sorry, I've got to. No, the message gone. If there won't be any wild habitats left because there's so many people. The only way to feed them all is through efficient forms of arable farming. Otherwise, the planet would be more devastated than it already is. Okay. Looks like devil's advocate there.
Well, I think the thing is, it's sort of like if everybody did this and if everybody, the thing is not many people do go out foraging, and there are certain rules of foraging. And I think one of the main rules is don't take too much stuff, so if you are doing some foraging, only take a little bit. So if you see a load of nettles, don't just chop them all down and take them home with you. Leave some for nature. You don't need very many, and we can see with our eyes, how much impact we're having. And the wild food isn't an industry, and it isn't a problem. So I think it doesn't look like it's going to become a problem. So, but I think until it does actually come about, people go, oh my God, all these people going out foraging, we've got to put a stop to it. But like I say, at the moment, like in the UK, 50% of the land is used for livestock. So, if that was all wild, there'd be loads of wild forage food to have. The indigenous, people have been growing food within wild environments for a long time. Indigenous people plant fruit trees and other crops in the wild. So then amongst the wild trees and the wild plants, there'll also be intended crops. So rather than having to chop down the whole forest to grow one monocrop, we can actually grow our crops within the forest environment. And people might be feeling a hell of a lot better about themselves if they, in order to get their meal for the day, they go into nature and forage in it, and there'd be all the food there. There'd be abundance. That's what I think. That's one of the theories about how the human brain expanded. We were living in a very temperate environment with lots of fruit trees and abundant. It's like the orangutans. They spend 2 hours a day or less than 2 hours a day foraging the food that they need, and then they go and sit in the trees, at the top of the trees in the rainforest, looking out. And they've got it such, look at us, we're running around like mad people, working all day in all our lives to have a house and some food to eat. We've got it all wrong. We gotta get our act together. Yeah.
We rely in this country on a vast amount of food from overseas. And you mentioned about something in Canada. You obviously got the UK, but how far does, in terms of vegan organic, how far beyond these shores does it spread? Are we because we get, like for bananas and lots of fruits are from overseas, wheat we rely on from overseas. How far is this going to be spreading?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, I think the Second World War was an example of how we can do it. The government during the Second World War, Attlee worked with the farmers, and they supported the farmers. The farmers got grants to have greenhouses, so that people were growing food wherever they could. People were put on rations. And it was a reality. It was like, this is an emergency. We got behaved like it's an emergency, and we grew most of our food within our country. So it can be done. We just need the will. We need the will from the government, and we need people to start acting like this is a real emergency. Where we are now is a real emergency. It's the lack of will in the way that the land is currently used that's the problem. Of course, we shouldn't be importing. I mean, I think at the moment, I think we're relying on, is it 2,000 or 3,000 miles for most of our food to travel, but we don't have to be. I think there was a experiment. I don't know how it went, or it might still be going on, but I think there was a bunch of vegans that put up this experiment trying to get people to eat just vegan food, which was grown in the UK for a year. I think that was last December that started. So I'll be interested to see how many people took part and how they got on.
I'd be interested to know if that's doable. I mean, as a country, we rely so much on wheat for bread, obviously. I mean, there are other forms of grains, but for bread, for pastries, and and most of that, I believe, is coming from, I don't know whether it be maybe Canada, and it used to be Ukraine, the USSR, maybe. So we're relying a lot on imports.
Well, like I say, you've got Lawrence Candy, who's a former beef farmer, and he's just converted his beef farm into a wheat and oat farm. Okay. So if there was other Lawrence Candys, relative in terms of grains, he's probably relatively small, but he's been very successful in converting his farms to wheat and grain. So I'm sure if he can do it, then there's no reason why other farms can't do it. We've just got to change our land use. We've got to get these, we've got plenty of land. We've got to just, we take the animals off, and then there's loads of land to grow all the food that we need. The problem with this country is that we do away with the with industries which seem to cost us money. We go, it's cheaper to get products from abroad, so we'll run down the industries in this country and get it from a country where they've got third world cheap labor, and we get it cheaper. But we're paying, someone on the other side of the world is paying the cost for our cheap produce.
Thanks, Dan. There's a comment, this is from Debbie, I think it's more about the veganism side. So the more demand there is for veganic grown vegetables, the cheaper it will be. We find it hard to promote veganism in Cape Town. We found activism gets a response, but it's more like a drop in a bucket. And we hope that in time a person might decide to align their values with their behaviour. Veganism is logical, moral, right, and there's a wealth of data to support continuing to live on this planet, but reason isn't enough to convince people. And I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of other different issues, and obviously when there's poverty around, you could say, well, that may be promoting, people going out foraging because it's not going to cost them anything. But on the same time, people see organic food as expensive. So, there's a lot of issues involved in terms of people going on the route of getting organic fruits and vegetables. I know, John, if anybody else had a question, we've got just a few moments left. This might be the last question. So I'll ask John, could you unmute yourself, please, John?
Yes, you're very much into the nature and doing things naturally. Would you say it'd be better for vegans to have, when having milk, plant milks or plant cheese, should it come from monocultures like oats and rice milk, or would it be better coming from trees, say almond milk, hazelnut milk, coconut milk, because it's way better for the environment. You get a whole ecosystem living amongst the trees, whereas if you've got oats, it's a monoculture, common husk goes through, and whatever, it doesn't matter to live in that environment, so it gets sort of chopped up. So you were mentioning it was good to have a farmer going to oat, producing oats, but the produce of trees is way better for the environment than the product of monocultures. What would you say? Would you go for oat milk or say hazelnut?
Thanks, John.
I'll have your oat milk from the trees, please. I'll have 10 bottles if you've got some to sell. It sounds good. Yeah, I agree with you, definitely.
Okay. So there you are. At that, I'll wind up the meeting. I'm just going to say, if you could all unmute, I just said a very big thanks to Dan for talking about the Vegan Organic Network. The website is, can you tell us, Dan, just remind people?
www.veganorganic.net.
Okay.
Sign up for our free newsletter.
And yes, then you said also that the map will be available, and there's a guide to foraging as well on there. Is that right?
Yeah, we do. We have an online show which goes out once every other month. We've got Veganic Gardeners question time happening tomorrow night. That's a monthly show. If you go onto the news section of the website, you'll find the Veganic Gardening map. And also we've got a website which is dedicated to Stockfree Organic, but there's a link from the Vegan Organic Network website to the Stockfree Organic website. So you'll be able to find more about the Stockfree Organic Standards there.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to ask if the members would like to join me in a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
much.
Thank you.
That's great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for
Thanks
watching.
very much.
Let me just stop the recording.